Hello everyone! Here in this video I'm going to show you how to create a frequency distribution table and a relative frequency distribution table, and we're also going to look at how to turn that into a histogram. So I have this large data set here. Well, it's not that large. It has about 29 data points in it. 29 students, and we're going to create a frequency distribution table for their midterm score. So I'm just going to copy this midterm score column. I'm going to put it on a new sheet down here. I'm going to rename this sheet to match what it is. It's about the midterm score, just to help me keep this organized. And I will paste that down in there. So if you missed that, you could just right click after you have that copied and just paste that midterm score in there. So to help me begin creating my frequency distribution table, I'm just going to start organizing some things. It doesn't particularly matter where, but I do know that I'm going to want a column for the frequency. And what are we counting? Frequency means count. We're counting midterm scores in this case. So I'll also make a column for the midterm scores. I did say that I would go on and expand to create also a relative frequency distribution. I'm going to add something into this column here next to that, but for now I'll just leave this like this. To help us start organizing our data, let's think about where we want to start this first group of midterm scores. It is helpful to know what is the smallest score in this data set and what is the largest score in this data set. So I just created some boxes for me to put the min and the max in. And to calculate them, I'll type equals min, because that will pop up with the min function in Excel. Inside of that min function, I'm going to select all of the data. You can see that filled this in with the A2 to A30. That's where the data lives. And then I will put a parenthesis at the end of that to close it off and hit enter. And that gives me a minimum score of 40.24. And in the same way, I will do max to see what the max score is of all of this data. And it tells me the max score is 99.7. So now that I know that the smallest score is 40.24, I'll just start my first class at 40. Before I think about where I'm going to end it, I want to talk about where I'm going to start the second class. We're talking about grades here, midterm scores, so I think it does make sense to go by tens. So I'll start my second class at 50. And then I'll just continue to increase. 60, 70, increasing by 10. It's important that we stay consistent in how we are splitting up our groups. Now I'll go backwards and fill in my upper class limits. To figure out where I'm going to end this first group, I consider where I started the second group. The second group started at 50, so it does make sense to end that first group. It's tempting to just put 49 in there, but when you look at the data, you see the data has decimals. It's to the second decimal place, so I'm going to end at 49.99 to compensate for that. And then similarly, I will increase by tens and fill in the rest of my upper class limits. Helpful for us to tell Excel what the bins are specifically. And what the bins are just the upper limits that separate these classes. So I'm just copying those over. So now that I have those upper limits in there, now let's go fill out our frequency. I'm going to begin to type the word frequency so the frequency command pops up. The first thing it wants to know is where is the data. Though the data is here from A2 to A30, you can just select that. And then I will put a comma. The next thing it wants to know is where are the bins. Well, we put the bins here. We can just click and select them there and hit enter. And it fills out these frequencies for us. So for instance, here it has told us that 3 students scored between a 60 and a 69.99 on their midterm exam. Let's just do a quick little check here. I want to go back off to the side where I was just doing some calculations to get an idea for the data. I want to know how many midterm scores do we have in here. You see this is not going to work because I did not hit enter first, so you do have to type enter first. I want to use the count command to count how many numbers are this, how many midterm scores are there. it tells me 29. So let's double check that when we used our frequency command and it split up these scores according to these groups, did it get all 29 students? And it looks like it did. So here I used the sum command to sum up all the frequencies, and it did. I'm just hitting escape on my keyboard because I was making a mess by clicking around. But I used the sum command, and it did show me that the sum of all the frequencies does match the total number of students that were in the course. I just cleaned that up a bit so it matches, like a column of things I'm calculating and a column of things I calculated. Now let's go on to calculate the relative frequency column. I'm going to hit enter. To get the relative frequency for this first group, I want to take the frequency of 6. So I'm going to backspace that. The frequency of 6, so I'll click on the 6 cell. Rather than typing 6, I'm going to click on that cell, and I want it to be divided by the total number of scores that were in the data set. And I'll hit enter, and it gives me a relative frequency of about 0.20, about 0.21, about 21%. It should be the same for the second class, because the second class has the same frequency. One thing we could do, let's try this formula, this Excel thing where it repopulates and continues to fill itself out. Because what I want to do in this next cell is I want to take 6 and divide it by 29 again. But there's an issue here. So it looks like it took 6, the correct 6, but it divided it by nothing, because it divided by what was under the 29, which is not what we want it to do. So let's talk about how to fix that. So what I'm going to do back in this cell, where I initially started this formula, I do want to take I4 and divide by I11, but I always want to divide by I11. It might not be I11 on your worksheet. It depends on where you put everything, but my point is you always want to divide by the total number. Maybe you did this count thing over here and it's D4. That's perfectly fine. But so to tell Excel to lock in that I11, you type F4 on your keyboard after that cell label I11. And you'll see that these dollar signs pop up to lock that in. Now when you drag down, it's still dividing by the I11. So those dollars, I'm hitting escape because I messed it up, but those dollar signs lock that cell in so it continues to use the same value to calculate. So I'll go ahead and drag this down for the rest of my frequency distribution, and I calculate these relative frequency now. We do have the option to turn them into percentages. Do notice that if I add all these up just to check, if I sum all these percentages up, it should sum up to 100% because we are hoping this is all of the data. Fantastic. So it did. Now that we have these, let's talk about how to create a frequency distribution graph, which would be the graph of a histogram. So to graph this data, if I wanted to create just a histogram for this frequency distribution, I'll select the frequency. Notice I'm not grabbing the 0. That 0 just means there was no data that was greater than 99.99. No one scored higher than a 99.99 on the midterm. So that's what this 0 under here is popping up for in the frequency count. So I don't need that, but I'll select my frequency data and I'm going to go to Insert, Column, 2D Graph. So it creates this chart for me where it has shown frequency on the vertical axis and the midterm scores with poor labels, right? This 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is not very descriptive on the horizontal axis. So let's fix that. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to hit Select Data. So now that I'm in here, I want to fix the horizontal axis labels. Horizontal means sideways, axis labels. Right now the axis labels are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't want that. I want a new field. Well, what numbers do I want? It's asking me that now. And it says, what values do you want to use? I want to use these values. These midterm score values that are in H4 to H9. And I will check that and notice that it changes them. So now it matches what we set it up with. Let's go and fix a few more things in this graph. The chart title right now is just chart title. That's not a great one. Let's do student midterm scores. That's more descriptive. This came from a student data set. We took the midterm score column. I will change the title to student midterm scores. It's in a good position. I don't need the legend, like that series 1 blue part. I don't need that. I do need to know what is this, these values on the horizontal axis. What are those values in there? So I'm going to change the label for that horizontal axis. The title of that axis I will change. So I'm clicking on this axis title button here. I'm going to change it to midterm scores because that's what we're showing along the horizontal axis. Now along the vertical axis, close the entire horizontal axis folder. But along the vertical axis, I'm again going to go and I'm scrolling down to axis title to turn that on. I want the axis title to be frequency because we're showing frequency along that vertical axis. So great, that's changed. So one thing I will be looking for when I check your histograms are for the titles to be accurate along the axes and for a good title to be on the graph. I do want to point out a subtle difference is that alternatively, rather than creating a histogram that shows frequency, I could also create a histogram that shows relative frequency. And I will show you that momentarily. The last thing I want to do to fix this histogram is we do not want the data to, we don't want the bars on the histogram to be so far apart. We want the bars on the histogram to be closer together. So to fix that, I want to fix the gaps that are happening on the horizontal axis. So I'll open up horizontal axis and I will reduce the gap width down to 0. And that smushes all of my bars together and I can kind of get a better picture of what's going on and how the data is behaving. So the last thing I'll show you very quickly is just how to create a relative frequency histogram. Very similarly, I will select the relative frequency data. I will go to Insert. I'm inserting a 2D column. I'm going to clean some things up. I'm still showing student midterm scores. If I want to be more specific, I am showing relative frequency, but I could just leave it as student midterm scores. I'll leave that as the chart title. I do not need a legend. I'll just turn that off. Horizontal axis, I want my bars to touch, so I decrease my gap width to 0. I do not like the labels they are using along the horizontal axis. You don't fix that in here though. You can fix your axis title in here, which is still midterm score, but you can't fix the labels on that until you go to data. So there's 2 columns here, data and format. You go to data to fix the labels on that. You want your horizontal axis labels to be a new field. You want them to be the midterm scores. So just grab and select what you want them to be and hit that green check mark to change them. Last thing I need to do is go back to format, not deal with the horizontal axis, but the vertical axis, because there's no label on the vertical axis right now. What is the vertical axis showing? It is showing relative frequency. So I want to change that axis title to say relative frequency. Notice the difference. Here I have relative frequency showing percentages. Alternatively, here I have frequency showing counts. How many versus what is the proportion of the entire data set. So that's how we do this in Excel. And we'll do this with different data. You'll have some assignments where you may work with a different set of data from another data set, or you may work with data that you chose in this course, but that is the idea of how you create your distribution and then use it to make some histograms.